Welcome back to Math Teacher Institute. Today we're going to talk about saying I don't know in our math class and what to do next. Come on in. Hi, I'm Monhar Dalal and this is Math Teacher Institute. I've been a math teacher all over the world and I have a master's degree from the Math for Teaching program at Harvard. If you love math and love teaching math to others, this is the place for you. When you're the teacher in a class with 30 or more students, it can feel like you have to be the expert on everything all the time. And you can feel nervous about putting yourself or being in a situation where you don't know an answer to a question or feeling like you have to tell students, I don't know. But you really shouldn't be. First of all, you are the expert in that classroom, whether you know the answer to every single question or not. You are still the expert. So you shouldn't feel nervous about that. Plus, it's important for us to start teaching our students that math is not a finished subject. No one knows all of math. Even the most brilliant mathematicians and professors have new things that they're learning every day, discovering, inventing, whatever you want to call it. There's new math coming out all the time. And everyone is trying to learn more math every day. So it's okay to say to your students, I don't know the answer to that. That's part of the learning process. There are lots of things I didn't know and I know now, and you're learning things every day as well. So now let's talk about what do we do after we say, I don't know, and how do we move forward in our class. An important part of this is that it's always best to be honest with your students. Honesty and telling the truth to your students is very important because you don't want to be seen by your students as a liar, right? So if you don't know the answer to a question, they're going to know. You're not going to be able to fake your way out of it. So the best thing here is to just be honest. Use it as a learning opportunity for all of your students. So one of the simple things we can do is to just say to our students, I don't know the answer to that right now. I'll have to think about it. Why don't we talk about that a little bit later? Now we're shifting the focus back onto whatever our lesson is really about, as opposed to this sort of tangent that maybe a student was going to take us on. We're not dismissing it. We're not saying we're never going to talk about it or that it's not important. But we are saying that right now we're going to focus on this, and I'm telling you that I'm going to check into that, I'm going to think on it, and we're going to talk about it later. And do talk about it later. Even if that means you say, I looked it up, and there is some explanation for this, but it's quite complicated. I think it's a little above our level, so we're not really going to get into a lot of detail with it, but it's a great question, and it's something that I think you'll learn a few years from now down the road. That's an okay answer, but do come back to it, but don't let it derail your whole classroom. Another way to handle the I don't know situation in class is to actually model for your students how you gain new mathematical information when you don't just have a teacher to raise your hand and ask the question to. If you have the time, or if the question is relevant or something you really want to explore with your students, stop your class, pull up the Google on your computer, and let's do a little bit of research together. Maybe a great opportunity to teach your students about Math Stack Exchange, right? A great place where lots of interesting and unique math questions have been asked and explained, or other similar sites. But show your students how to research for math. Researching in math is not something that necessarily a lot of our students have a lot of expertise with. If it's not in their textbook, and if their teacher doesn't know, that's usually the end of the line for them. So teach them how to use the internet, how to use tools to go and seek out these complicated answers to these interesting questions. And they may all benefit from having seen that process happen once. And you then get to show them, look, I didn't know this. I looked it up online and now I know. Now we all have learned the answer to this question. It's a great way to really help all of our students grow in an interesting way, even if the question maybe wasn't necessarily something that is going to benefit all of us right now. So here's an example of how I've dealt with this in the past in my class. I was teaching pre-calculus in China, and one of my particularly bright students would often chime in with very interesting but deep and challenging questions. And so we were learning about rational functions, particularly about oblique asymptotes and slant asymptotes. And I was showing my students using Desmos how the end behavior asymptote could be a line, could be parabolic, but could be cubic or quartic, or really any sort of polynomial shape. And he raised his hand and he asked a question, and he said, well, could a rational function have an end behavior asymptote that is a rational function? And I thought, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it would make a lot of sense to me because of how rational functions work and how end behavior asymptotes work, but we had a nice little discussion about it. We kind of talked about like what would that have to look like in an equation, and we kind of all agreed that there didn't really seem to be any real way that was possible. And we did a little bit of research and didn't really find much on it, but it was a great way to kind of all open our minds and think, I would have never thought of that, and let's go through a thought experiment of what would that have to be? What kind of equation would it have to come from? What would it look like on a graph? And then think, is that something that's really possible or not? And we kind of determined that, not so much, but it was a great discussion, and it all started with me saying, I don't know. Now, another thing you can do, if a student asks a question that maybe you're not so sure about, but you know that the answer is going to be out there somewhere, you can let that student or all of your students or some of your students be in charge of researching that and coming back and reporting next class or next week, right? Say, oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Could you do us a favor? Could you look that up and let us know next class what you find as the answer? Or say to all the students, hey, that's a great question. Part of tonight's homework is I want everyone to write 1 or 2 paragraphs on what they learned about this particular question, research it a little bit, find out what you learned, and include a source at the bottom so that we know where you found your information. That's a great way to include some writing into our class. That's a good way to include some research into our math class. And that's a great way to have all of our students explore a question that should be one that they could find an answer to, but that maybe you don't initially have the right answer to, or you don't want to tell them the answer to. Which leads me to my last point, which is that sometimes I pretend not to know the answer to things that I do know the answer to. Sometimes students will ask questions, they'll say, I don't know. Why don't we all look that up together? Or, hey, do you mind? Let's break out into groups and let's use our computers and let's see if we can find the answer and talk about it amongst ourselves, right? So sometimes when you know that students have an opportunity there to really discover and develop some understanding on their own, don't always just hand it to them. Don't always spoon feed it to them. Let them struggle a little bit. Let them find their own way to the answer and let them realize that, oh, wow, yeah, if I just thought about this other way, I would have figured it out on my own, right? So it's good sometimes to pretend even if you don't know, but that really only works if you're honest at times when you actually don't know. If you only say, I don't know, when you do know, the students will know that the jig is up and you're just playing them. So it's great. Always be honest with your students. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know when you don't know. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know when sometimes you do. And that might help benefit the learning process. If this video has been helpful for you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. And if you have a colleague who you think might benefit from some of these ideas, please share it with them as well.